Welcome to Raising Teens Off Script. In this series, we look at some of the more difficult and challenging things we may encounter when we're parenting teenagers. I'm Paula Pridham, a director here at Care for the Family, and together with Mark Chester, our parent support manager, we'll be exploring what parents can do when they're worried about sex, relationships and pornography and what their own teenagers may be getting up to. We're joined by two brilliant guests who've lots to share with us. Karin Cooke has vast experience of delivering sex and relationship education. She's also the author of a book called Dangerous Honesty, which is about pornography and women, and has parented through the teenage years herself with her 3 children who are now adults. And Jason Royce has over 20 years' experience of education, youth and community work. He is the leader of Souster Youth and is passionate about helping parents navigate the tough challenges of raising kids himself. And he also has a toddler and one on the way, so he knows all about that. Welcome. So let's start off by maybe getting a temperature gauge of how parents are feeling about this topic. Mark, you're talking to parents all the time. How do you think they're feeling?
Yeah, Paula, parents are in very different situations, aren't they? They're facing very different challenges and they have many different feelings about it. So some of the parents watching today will feel isolated, alone, maybe they feel judged, and some will feel very desperate in the situations they're facing. You know, I'm just out of the teenage years, so my youngest turned 20 recently. And I found myself often flip-flopping between 2 extremes, really. So on the one hand, some days I might think, well, they're still little angels and all they want to watch is the Disney Channel. But then another day, or even the next minute sometimes, I would think, actually, they're feasting on a daily diet of hardcore porn and all they ever think about is sex. And the truth, I would guess, for most of our teenagers is that they're somewhere in the middle of those 2 extremes.
And also, I guess as well, certainly when we were younger, many years ago in my case, you know, what fed into our education around this was very different to what's happening now. So, Jason, I know you've got some thoughts on this. What is actually shaping young people today's views around relationships, sex and pornography?
So the first thing to say is that it's many of the things that have always shaped their views around sex and relationships, and that's the relationships around them, the relationships they see in their community, perhaps the home where they live, the relationships that they see, that they can observe. So we're now living in the digital age, of course, and young people are digital natives. 96% of this generation own a smartphone, and most of their internet use and most of the content they consume is on those devices. So it's things like, you know, Love Island and TikTok influencers who are showing them how to work out and how their bodies are supposed to look. It's them learning from social media about how people are interacting in their relationships. It's watching Kim and Kanye, you know, and people like that. And how do they interact? What am I supposed to be doing in relationships? And pornography is playing a big part of it as well. By the age of 16, 2/3 of young people will have seen hardcore pornography online. That doesn't mean they're addicted or watching it all the time, but they've seen it at some point. And these are some of the ways that young people are learning about sex and relationships in the digital age.
Yeah, I mean, 66% is high, isn't it? I mean, that's a lot. But I know many people would say, but why is it a problem? Just because they're watching it, sure, they're just going to watch it and go over their heads and that'll be it. Is there more to it than that? I mean...
I think it's different for different things that I mentioned there. So perhaps the social media and some of the relationships that we can observe. Some of those things is asking, well, what is just being presented to me? You know, there's a famous quote where someone said, don't compare someone's highlight reel with your everyday. And sometimes we do that on social media. We see this view where people present this perfect version of their lives or their dinner or their abs or whatever. And the lighting's just right. And we realize we don't look like that or our relationships aren't like that. So we've got to question, is it realistic? But in terms of pornography, I think pornography is a particular problem because it warps and distorts what even our culture today says is a healthy relationship. You see people being mistreated, people breaking trust in relationships, and people doing things that can be normalized, but actually aren't really acceptable ways to treat another person, or how we within our families may want our kids or even ourselves to behave. And so I think that is a kind of key part of this to consider.
And I think it's also, you know, as parents, you know, I was aware that there was pornography around when I was a teenager, but it was usually on the top shelf or under the mattress. And now, for me, the content of what our teenagers are watching, I mean, Jason mentioned hardcore. You know, we're not going to go into the details of what that is today, but I do think there's something about parents needing to educate themselves on when we hear the terminology pornography. It's very different today than it would have been in our day. You know, pornography is a huge billion-dollar business where films are being made all the time, and they are becoming harder and harder and even more violent. Sexual violence is on the increase in pornographic movies and films that they're watching. That's why I feel there is more of a danger around it.
The smartphone's been a game changer, hasn't it? It strikes me, you know, listening to you two talk about it, that when I was a teenager, my parents didn't parent me in the technological age. So we're the first generation of parents who are parenting in the technological age. So we've got no kind of role models in that sense, have we? So we're really quite pioneering in terms of this, and as pioneers, we're going to make some mistakes, aren't we? We're going to make mistakes parenting our children, but hopefully our children will learn from that, and it will help them parent the next generation a little bit better.
I know when I was teaching in schools, and you know, we're looking at 10 years ago even, one of the recommendations to parents then was make sure that your computer is in your lounge, not in your bedroom. Well, now it's in their pocket. And it's that accessibility, that 24-hour accessibility. But the anonymous nature, you know, they can access stuff that we will not know what they're accessing. And that, again, is a danger, I would say.
The good news, I think, as well, is many of the things that worked when we were being parented and that have always worked, and we'll probably speak about this over the next little while, but many of those things are still just as relevant. And so sometimes as parents, we can think, oh, I don't understand what's going on with all this TikTok stuff, or what's all this book face stuff that all the young people are doing today. And we feel like we're out of touch. But actually, the core stuff about what good parenting is, it's the same stuff that's always worked. Yeah. The technology's changed.
Yeah, very good.
I think as well, what I'd like to do perhaps at the beginning of this is to bust one of the myths about pornography. And this has come from sort of learning about your background, Karin, and what you've been involved with. Because the stereotype of who uses, let's think of pornography in particular, is a young lad up in his bedroom in the dark, early hours of the morning. But you've written about women and pornography and young girls and pornography. It's not just boys that are involved in this, is it?
I mean, it was interesting how this started, Paula, actually, because we started busting the myth, as you would say, in church. You know, for those of you that are actual Christians, people of faith, we started talking to the men about pornography within a church environment. And one very brave teenage 17-year-old came to me at the end of one of our services and said to me, is it just something for boys? Because I struggle with that as well. Well, that did something in me because I thought, no, and you are not the only one. And so I went on a whole journey of talking about it quite openly within my community, within my work, within church, with anybody around that would be willing to listen to me rant on about this is not just a male issue. Women are sexual beings and they are drawn to this. I mean, it's 1 in 3, you know, users of porn sites are women. And so for me, once I burst the bubble, I had women come in and tell me story after story after story. I had one woman who came to me at the age of 28. She'd started watching pornography at the age of 12, and she had not told a soul. She was taking this secret to the grave. And at the age of 28, when I started talking about it, she's like, you have no idea the grip that this has had on me. And now at least someone I can talk to. It's so important that we don't box it as a male issue. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. That's quite sobering, you know, to realise that, isn't it? And as we start thinking then about how, as parents, we can best equip our young people to deal with this issue, what age, when do you start? I mean, you said how how early people are beginning to see stuff. But if we take pornography out of it even, just talking about sexual relationships, what age do we start talking with our young people about it?
So I think what's good for us to remember as parents is that our children, the moment they're born, they're sexual beings, and their sexual development starts, well, pre-birth, if you like, but the bit that we can affect, as soon as they're born. And so they're always learning about relationships and sex and the relationships they see, perhaps at home, if there's a romantic relationship between their parents. It's their uncles, aunties, friends, parents of peers. There are lots of ways that they're learning about relationships from the word go. Then there are all these other kind of influences, the school curriculum, the conversations we have with them, stuff they see on TV. So there's lots going in right from the word go. And so I think we've got to have, as parents, we've got to have in mind, we've always got to be talking about this in age-appropriate ways. The conversation that I might have with a 15, 16-year-old in my work with young people in schools be very different from the conversation that I have with my son, who's much younger, about there's stuff on the internet Daddy doesn't want you to look at, there's stuff on the internet that we're happy for you to see, and helping him to distinguish between those two things. So I think always age appropriate, but as the moment my son was born, doing the work that I've done, I knew I've got to start teaching him about sex and relationships. And here's one thing we always used to say in my work with young people. We used to say, and we still say it, young people mimic what they see modelled. And so they're always learning. We might not think, oh yeah, today we're on curriculum part 7.2. Even when we don't think we're putting something in, they're watching us. They're seeing how we engage, seeing how we react when something unexpected happens. All of those things are always learning.
One of the things I guess we can do from a very young age is start to help them develop some critical thinking about the things that they're seeing, so that when they get to a stage where they might see pornography or they might be forming their opinions about the sexual relationships they're going to have from TV programs, that actually they can assess what they're seeing and test it against reality. Because very often it's not reality, is it? And actually, if they see some porn, we don't want them to try and sort of almost mimic that and become like a porn star. We want them to have a satisfying relationship with someone, a satisfying sexual relationship, not a performance, but participate in that. So if we can train them to think critically about what they're seeing, then they can evaluate that and sort of work out, is this reality? And it'll help them work out their values. And from an early age, I guess we can do that, obviously not necessarily specifically with porn or sex, but with other things, just to develop those critical thinking skills.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I did this with with all my kids, my son and my daughters, where we would sit and we'd pause the adverts on the television, even random ones like mascara adverts, for example, and we'd look at the eyelashes and we say, is that real? Can you really, by buying that mascara, make your eyes look like that? And my 8-year-old would be like, no, that's ridiculous. I was like, yes, it is. And you begin that at an early age to when they're 13, 14, 15, and they're watching things like Love Island, and you pause Love Island, and you actually have a conversation. Tell me what's going on in that relationship at the moment. Tell me whether the way they're talking to each other is wholesome. Tell me whether you think that there's going to be loyalty in that relationship. Those sorts of things, getting them to think critically and actually, I'm not sure that's right, is so key. I love doing that.
And then it's following up, isn't it, with that to say, okay, well, here's something we can see. We're being lied to here about what relationships are, or we're watching a relationship that's not getting off to a great start. How do we think that's going to end? So what would be a positive alternative? What should a healthy relationship look like? How should people treat each other? What do we want good sex to be like when we're ready? And that's an area where I think we can also help young people to discover their own values, but also input some of our family values in there as well, because we've got opinions about this stuff, and it's our job to pass some of that on, not in a controlling way where we try to think for them. They're going to eventually think for themselves whether we like it or not, but we have a role in shaping that and a positive sort of thing of what does good look like.
Now, I know this sounds like a very adult conversation we're having with our young people. And I know in the past there were lots of conversations, certainly when it came around alcohol and drug use, to just shock our young people. If we shock them, then they're going to scare them off. Well, I think there's some research done around that, and they found that if you use the shock tactics, if it was somebody who wasn't going to do it anyway, then the shock tactics just reinforce the fact that they weren't going to do it. But if somebody was a risk taker, rather than being put off it, it actually encouraged them to get involved because they thought they could beat the odds, as it were, and it won't happen to me. So I wonder, does that transfer over from sort of around alcohol and drugs into this scenario when it comes to sexual activity and pornography?
In my experience, shame is not a very productive way to help people live healthy lives or to change behaviour. In my experience, working with young people, shame tends to drive stuff underground. It makes people feel bad about themselves. And one of the stories Karin was sharing with us earlier is about kind of how shame can be one of the motivators that sends people towards these unproductive things like drugs and alcohol or pornography. So shame is not productive. I think it is that sort of better narrative, offer something that's better, because ultimately pornography doesn't deliver on its promises. It promises a satisfaction, and it offers a very temporary, fleeting satisfaction that actually leaves you worse off than where you started. But actually, what's better than that?
I think that's really key, because one of the things in communication with teenagers, some of them, and you may have a teenager like this, where they're very open, where they will have conversations with you. And the shame-based message is so important. Don't go down that track. When you're having conversations, it's not about telling them everything that's bad. It's balancing that communication by, maybe explaining to them some of the things we talked about the dangers of pornography, but it's also balancing, okay, so how can we then have, if you're not going to go down that track, how do we develop good relationships that will look towards wholesome sexuality, sex life in the future? And that's an interesting and quite difficult conversation to have at times with a teenager who is like, Mum, I don't want to talk to you about sex, thanks very much. So I think it's important we have those conversations, but I'm not a fan of the shock tactics. Yeah. I
think if I just jump in as well, so I think for me, coming from a faith tradition, it feels very natural to ask a question like, what is sex for? I know that there'll be lots of parents who we all interact with who aren't coming from that same thing, but that same background. But I think it's an equally important question that within your family system of values, what role does sex play? Because for all of us, whether from a faith tradition or not, we are clearly, as social animals, we're wired for relationships. And sex is a key driver of one aspect of our relational nature. And so we need to answer the question, what is it for? Is it something that isn't that significant and we can share it with anyone at any time and it doesn't matter and commitment is irrelevant? Or is there something deeper within our family values? Wherever we're getting that from, I think if that is something for us as parents, it's worth teasing that out and working out what that is. So if we can answer that question, what is sex for? What is a good relationship? We can help point our children towards that, which is what we want for them. I don't meet any parent who doesn't want their kid to have healthy relationships and fulfilling relationships.
I really like that idea of working out our own values first, and I think then that helps us in a much better place, like you say, to help our children work out what their values are as well. Because if you have a son or a daughter, 16-year-old, they come home and they tell you that they're having sex with their boyfriend or girlfriend, it's very easy to fly off the handle, isn't it? And just react to that. But it's much better, I guess, to sit down and talk it through with them and say, well, I've got my own thoughts and values on this, that, but let's start off, what are your thoughts and values about this? And I think that's always a much more positive way to start, rather than tell them what we think. It's to ask them what they think, and then we can share our own thoughts and values in the process of that conversation.
And it takes me way back to when I was a teenager, and I can remember being at the local youth club, and my sister, who's a lot older than me, suddenly I get called to the door. Your sister's here to get you, and she said, "You've got to come home now. you've got to come home and speak to mum. And I didn't know what was going on. And I get home and it was almost like, put the spotlight on interrogation, because my mother had found my diary under the bed and had read it. And it was dealing with stuff like this around, sexual activity and doing stuff that as a family went against our family norms, really. And just this barrage of stuff. And I just did not want to engage because they just came at me and I just withdrew, really, and I didn't engage on it. So if you find yourself in that situation, what do you do if you've got a young person who just doesn't want to connect with you, doesn't want that conversation? Where the heck do you go? Karin, I know you've got, I've spoken to you before now, and you've told me a lovely sort of almost a ladder of communication that you use.
I mean, this is just something, it's a helpful model maybe for some parents just to think about, because often as parents, when we have that scenario, you want to go in for the jugular, don't you? What the heck was that all about in your diary? Tell me all about it. Why did you put it there? Why did you not talk to me? The why. And they will probably do what you did. I'm not going to tell you anything. So just this sense of having this ladder of communication towards that and not jumping in at the deep end. And one of the sort of 5 levels, I suppose, and the first level is cliches. It's like, oh, how you doing? Yeah, fine. Great. Just a little bit of superficial, surface level conversation. They come in from their day. Okay? Yeah, great. Number 2, facts. So how are you doing? How was your day? What did you have for lunch today? Who did you hang out with today? And maybe even then they'll go, oh, no one, nothing. But at least there's that conversation. And they may say, oh, I had a burger. Oh, great, was it nice? Facts. Then the next one is ideas. So the ideas bit, it's something you touched on, Mark. I think that's so key. And it's one of the levels that we introduced in our family and loved it, because we'd ask them. So an example being, say they had a rubbish day at school. So tell me a little bit more about that. What happened, Oh, the flipping teacher. Okay, so tell me about that scenario. What would you have done? What would your opinion be on a different way forward? And that can go right across the spectrum of communication. Give me your idea. Does then that fit in with our family value, our family beliefs? But it's that conversation that you want to know what they're thinking. So ask them what they're thinking, ask them their ideas. Number 4 then, is feelings. How did that make you feel? When she did that, when he did that, when that relationship finished, how did that make you feel? Oh, I was peed off, I was angry, I was upset. Oh, okay, that must have been really hard. Yeah, it was. Then the 5th one is that transparency. So that sense of going deeper, the sense of, well, when they made you feel angry, how did you process that? Who did you talk to? You can always talk to me about that situation. But it's not jumping in at number 5, it's going through those levels. And I just think you'll bounce from one to the other. One day, Paula, they will sit at the table and tell you everything. And the next day you'll have, what do you have for food? No, nothing. Okay, it's one of those days. And I think we've just got to go with the flow.
And also, I know, Karin, you're not even talking about this from a theoretical point of view, are you? Because within your own family, you've experienced this with your daughter, who revealed stuff that was going on in her life, and you had to presumably think of your ladder and where you were going to jump in. Do you want to tell us about that?
I've got 3 children, and one of them went through a time in her teenage years where she did get involved in watching pornography. And she was watching things online. And it literally was, she told me, literally as my book was being published, all about women and pornography. And I was devastated. Because there I was, somebody who was supposed to be this, expert in supporting young girls and young women. And there I've got my daughter who is struggling with this. And it was heartbreaking as a parent. And to be honest, I didn't know what to do. I wrote the book and I'm like, but when it's personal, it goes deeper and it brings fears. And what if, you ask the what if this is addictive? What if this is something that is going to carry on and damage her for the rest of your life? You ask those questions. But you don't show them that you're asking those questions. You go in with, oh, thank you so much for telling me. It's speaking in thank you for the courage. That must have taken a lot for you to tell me that. And I just appreciate that. Let's journey this together. And we did journey it together. And she actually asked me, and this was, you know, she was sort of 13, 14, and this was based on trying to build a relationship over the years from the age of 4 or 5, where you're talking about different things, where then at 13, 14, she was able to talk. And we went on a journey, and she said, I want you to hold me accountable. And to be honest, I didn't want to be the person that wanted to be. I didn't want to know. I was like, I don't want to know when you're doing it, thank you. And then we'd celebrate a month, and she'd gone a month without watching it, and we'd be like, yeah. But then she did watch it again, and we went on a journey, and it was a long-term journey. You know, it wasn't just overnight. But one of the things that was fundamental in that was that she knew that I was there. She knew the door was always open. I was never going to shut the door, no matter how difficult it got, no matter how many times she, in her head, wasn't me saying it, but in her head she failed. I was like, you can always come back. You can always keep talking. And you know what? It was the long term. It didn't take long in the sort of breadth of her life. It was a key time in her teenage years. And now it's not an issue. But journeying through with her, it built our relationship to the point now she's in her mid-20s. We have conversations about everything, which is fantastic.
I'm aware that it's great listening to Karin's story, because I'm kind of taking mental notes here for when mine reached that age. But for some of us, our kids aren't that open with us. And when we try to have those kind of conversations, they shut down, they push us away. And I've heard lots of parents say the same thing, you know, that they try to engage, their kids just aren't up for it. And I think it's worth us remembering that sometimes when they act like they need us the least or want us around the least, it's when they actually need us the most. And so for us as parents, we should take that kind of pushing away as a bit of a signal of, oh, they need me, they really need me. Because in developmental terms, you know, they're trying to work out who they are, and they can't do that on their own. They need us. They're asking us, you know, will you still be around when I'm struggling? Will you be around when I screw up? Will you be around when I don't know what to do next? Will you still be around when I'm not sure I want to be part of this family or like the people who live in this house? And I think as parents, we've got to make sure the answer to that is yes, we'll always love you. We'll always be there for you when you're struggling, even if you don't have a great story of engagement at one stage. It doesn't mean that in future, because eventually what I've seen through speaking to hundreds of parents and hundreds of young people is that the stuff that we pour in as parents, eventually it takes hold, even if it spends most of its time in the ground before it pokes its head above in their behaviour.
And I think that's so good, because I think, you know, we can often blame ourselves as parents when they don't talk to us. And, you know, please hear me. There were many times where she didn't talk to me. But I had to realise that her behaviour was not reflected in my value as a parent. I could do what I knew to do at that time. And I also think one of the things that we did was introduce a trusted adult. You know, she had, and, you know, I would recommend it, whoever it is, someone that you trust as an adult and that they agree with, that they can talk to themselves outside of you. We want to be the answer to all of their problems, don't we? We want to be that solution, but we can't be and we shouldn't be. We have to introduce youth workers and valued others and trusted adults into their life so they can say things about us that are winding them up. You know, I know that there were things she's like, well, my mum's doing my head in. And that's good. You can talk about that. And that's really important as well. It
makes me think, you know, listening to you both, it makes me think sometimes our children are asking us questions and we don't really know they're asking us questions. So, you know, a teenage girl who comes home and says, Mum, Dad, would you let me share a room with my boyfriend if he comes round to stay? You know, that could be a way of them trying to find out, well, what are the boundaries here? What are your values? And sort of pushing against those a little bit and seeing how far will you stretch almost. And sometimes they don't communicate that clearly, do they? So it's maybe looking for the underlying messages as well of what they're saying or how they're behaving.
Now, our time is running out rapidly now. We're drawing to the end of it this time together. So I'm just thinking, what if anybody's watching today and they're sitting there thinking to themselves, it's too late for me. You know, my daughter or my son is 15, 16. I should have been doing all of this 15 years ago and I didn't. It's too late. You know, what would you say to a parent in that situation?
I like to say that parenting's a 40-year game, and we shouldn't judge the success of our enterprise after 8 years or 15 or 16 years, because it's a long-term game. Now, if your kid at 40 is still phoning you up and asking for pocket money and a lift to their friend's house, then you might want to ask some questions about how your parenting's gone. But if your kid is struggling at 8 or 15, 16, that doesn't mean you failed. There's still a lot of time left to go. And the stuff we pour in, and this, we can bear this out in our own lives, and perhaps we can still remember the stuff that our parents said to us. We remember their examples, we remember their encouragements, and the things they said to us that were more difficult, long into our 70s, 80s, and perhaps even beyond that. So we've got to remember it's a long-term game, and the stuff we pour in will bear fruit in the long run. So that kind of gives us a bit of hope that when they seem like they're not listening, it doesn't matter, because those seeds are going deep into the ground and eventually they will grow. And they'll make mistakes along the way like we did. And you know what? They'll probably be okay, especially if they have our love and support and attention at those vital moments.
And yeah, that's so good, Jason. And I think for me, one of the things that I've kept in the forefront of my mind is, how do teenagers spell love? T-I-M-E. It's time. It's time when they're little. It's time when they're teens. It's time when they're older. You know, I'm a grandmother now. So my oldest is 30. She's got young boys herself. And she's still coming back for, Mum, what do I do about this situation with my 4-year-old? And it never ends, which is beautiful.
So we've talked about lots of different things over the last half hour. And I think the takeaways for me are, well, I think there's 3 things really. It's about communication, how important that is, how it's important to start it as young as we can, but also to maintain it even through those teens, those difficult years and beyond that. I think the other thing is about how important it is for us as adults, parents, carers to be informed ourselves about what's going on in our young people's lives, but also the world that they're involved with and what's going on out there, so that when we have those conversations, at least we sound a bit like we know what we're talking about. And I suppose the final thing is that it's never too early to start these conversations, but also it's never too late to begin them. I want to say thank you. You have been a joy to be with today. I've enjoyed the conversations very much. Thank you for taking time out to be with us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you as well for joining us today. And I do hope you found it helpful. If you've been affected by anything that we've been talking about, then please do take a look around our website. You'll find lots more information and support there. Now, we support families of all kinds, from birth right the way through to bereavement. And we do that across the UK and beyond. Again, the website is a great place to discover all we do. As a charity, we rely on donations, mostly from individuals. And without their support, it wouldn't be possible to put on programmes like this. Many people give by way of regular monthly donation. And if you're able to do that and join our band of partners, we'd be so grateful. Please go to cff.org.uk/donate. And in return, we want to say thank you for partnering with us by sending you a pack of great resources for you and your family, or you can give them away to friends or anyone else you think will be able to use them. Anyway, I do hope you join us again at our next Raising Teens Off Script. Until then, goodbye.